And our first items are information only. The hearing, we have a number of population proposals. We have issues related to the Coleman v. Brown ongoing court cases. But we're going to begin with a discussion of the recent audit on the sex offender evaluation program conducted by the state hospitals. So I think the state auditor's office should be here. Welcome to the committee, and if you would walk through for us your the findings from your audit.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us to provide a summary of our audit results. My name is Tammy Lozano, and I was the audit principal for this audit. And with me, I have John Lewis, who is the audit supervisor.
You might need to pull the mic a little bit closer. Okay. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is that better? Okay, yeah. Thank you. Our audit reviewed the Department of State Hospitals policies and procedures that it uses, that its evaluators use when assessing offenders for possible commitment to the program. The role of the evaluations is critical in the process of determining whether someone is committed to the program. It's ultimately the courts, through a judge or jury, that decide to make the final determination of whether someone is committed to the program. However, the court determinations are informed by the evaluations completed by the department's evaluators. Overall, our report concluded that there were inconsistencies in the evaluations we reviewed. We noted some required information that the evaluators are to consider when making their assessments were missing and incomplete in the evaluations. We also noted differences in the breadth of documentation that was reviewed by the evaluators. When an offender is being assessed for possible commitment to the program, at least two evaluators must evaluate the individual, and they have to both agree that they meet all three of the criteria. In our review, we did a comparison of the evaluations for the offenders, the two or more, and noted that there were differences in the documentation that they reviewed for their assessment. And in some cases, it was significant. One evaluator indicated interviewing certain mental health records and noted that the individual experienced suicidal thoughts. The second evaluator noted that the individual did not have any mental health concerns based on the documentation they reviewed. So you can see that if they're reviewing different documentations, then it can impact their assessment and evaluation of whether the individual meets the criteria for commitment. We made recommendations to the department to address the concerns that we saw at the missing documentation. We asked them to develop a written policy that requires the specific information that we found missing. We also noted a practice that was inconsistent that we thought was an opportunity for some efficiencies. We noted that some of the evaluators, so let me back up just a little bit. When they're making their assessment, there's three criteria, and the offenders have to meet all three criteria for them to be deemed that they meet the criteria for the program. If they don't meet any one of the three, then they're not eligible for the program. And some of the evaluations we saw, the evaluators didn't, once they determined that they didn't meet criteria number 2, which is whether they have a diagnosed mental disorder, then they didn't do the third evaluation because they said there's no way they can meet the third one if they don't have the second one. And we thought that was an opportunity for efficiency. However, because the law requires them to do all three, the department has directed its evaluators to do all three. So we thought, we made a recommendation to the legislature to change the law to allow state hospitals the flexibility to determine that once an evaluator determines they don't meet one of the criteria, that they have flexibility to stop. Finally, we noted some reasons for the inconsistencies. The first one is state hospitals' standardized assessment protocol is inadequate. The assessment protocol is the tool or the instructions to the evaluators for how to perform the evaluations. And their current protocol does not provide adequate detail and direction to perform the evaluations. Another reason for the inconsistencies we saw was the limited supervision, particularly at headquarters. There are 45 evaluators reporting to the chief psychologist, who is the only supervisor. And there's no formal structure to review the evaluations from a clinical perspective. So we made recommendations for both of these things to improve their standardized assessment protocol to include the kind of detail that would help evaluators perform their assessments consistently, and also to establish a formal supervisory structure to ensure that they can, that their evaluations are more consistent. And John is going to talk about training and their workload management.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is John Lewis. I was the audit supervisor on this audit. In addition to the items that Ms. Lozano mentioned, we discussed training. We made a recommendation that the state hospitals complete the development of a comprehensive training plan that it had developed and was starting to implement while we were conducting our audit, and that it provide annual training on updates to risk assessment instruments that its evaluators can use to assess whether an individual is at a high risk of reoffense. We noted during our audit that there was no training for almost 2 years, and this was during a time when the department was transitioning from primarily contract evaluators to evaluators who were on staff. And we also noted specifically that there was no training on dynamic risk assessment instruments, which is one kind of instrument that evaluators can use, again, to assess risk of reoffense. They did, in December of 2014, begin training on these dynamic risk assessment instruments, and likewise, in May of 2014, they had conducted training for some of their evaluators. So they do have a plan, and it's underway. We recommend that they complete the development of that and also do an annual training on the assessment instruments. Also, to improve its training, as we've noted, courts make the final decision about whether an individual should be committed to a state hospital as a sexually violent predator. The courts do not always agree with the evaluations from state hospitals' evaluators, and it would be good for state hospitals to track the outcomes of these court cases and use that as a tool to determine whether there might be some weaknesses in its process where it could improve and get evaluations to a point where courts might be agreeing more often. In addition to the issues surrounding the inconsistent evaluations, we talked in our audit a bit about how state hospitals does its workload for its evaluators at its headquarters. These are the evaluators that have been transitioned from contract to staff. We recommended that they develop a formal process for periodically reviewing its methodology for monitoring the workload of these evaluators, including exploring options for tracking time. They do some limited analysis of a workload matrix that they've put in place where evaluators are expected to perform a certain number of activities per month. But we felt that it would be better to make sure that that evaluating this matrix was an ongoing practice, because if your evaluators aren't doing as much as they could be doing, then you're wasting resources. If your evaluators are doing too much, there might be a temptation to cut corners. And finally, we noted that Coalinga State Hospital, which is where almost all of the sexually violent predators who've been committed are housed, has a backlog of annual evaluations. The individuals committed to Coalinga are supposed to be evaluated each year to determine whether they still meet the definition of a sexually violent predator, or whether there's a possibility that they might be eligible for conditional release, which is released to a less restrictive environment than the state hospital. The Coalinga was about 260 evaluations behind as of the end of 2014, and we recommended that the evaluators in Sacramento consider whether they could provide assistance, and also that Coalinga continue its efforts to try to hire enough evaluators to meet its demand. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's here from the department to respond? Thank you. Yeah. Welcome. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Shall we?
Maybe we could get another chair, or someone could leave the table so the director, Ms. Tosh. Yeah, thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. Stephanie Clendenin, Chief Deputy Director with the Department of State Hospitals. Did you want me just to dive into the questions, or would you like me to provide kind of a high-level overview of our sex offender commitment program?
Why don't you begin with the overview?
Okay, certainly will. So the Sex Offender Commitment Program was established in 1996. We have an annual budget for this program of approximately $16.5 million. The California Department of Corrections refers to the Department of State Hospitals sex offenders who are nearing their scheduled release date. And then we determine whether the inmate potentially qualifies as a sexually violent predator. We evaluate whether the inmate meets the statutory requirements for commitment as an SVP. Then that evaluation process consists of 3 steps. We do an administrative file review that's conducted by an analyst, a clinical screening by a psychologist, and then 2 forensic psychological evaluations by 2 separate SVP evaluators. Through this process, we are trying to determine whether the inmate meets 3 statutory criteria to be considered an SVP. And those 3 statutory criteria are that they have been convicted as a sexually violent criminal, convicted of a sexually violent criminal offense against 1 or more victims, that they have a diagnosable mental disorder that predisposes them to commit criminal acts, and then the 3rd criteria is that they are likely to engage in sexually violent predatory criminal behavior as a result of that diagnosed mental disorder if they do not receive the appropriate treatment in custody. So if after our 2 SVP evaluators evaluate the inmate and there is a difference of an opinion as to whether the inmate does meet those 3 statutory criteria, we then use 2 additional contract evaluators to reevaluate the inmate. If it's determined that the inmate meets the SVP criteria, then a request is sent to the district attorney, and the district attorney files a petition with the Superior Court for a probable cause hearing. If the judge determines that there is a probable cause, then the judge will order the person to remain in custody in a secured treatment facility until a trial is conducted. The male SVPs are treated at our Department of State Hospital's Coalinga facility, and females are treated at our Patton State Hospital. Our current census of sexually violent predators are 343 that are on probable cause, and 574 that have been fully committed as sexually violent predators. Since the passage of Jessica's Law, SVPs who are ultimately committed to a state hospital are committed for an indeterminate amount of time. And then once they've been committed, we give them an annual evaluation to determine whether they continue to meet the statutory SVP criteria. The individuals that were committed prior to Jessica's Law were committed to us for 2-year commitments, and we reevaluate them every 2 years. And they receive 2 recommitment evaluations on that every 2-year basis. When these annual evaluations are completed, if the evaluators determine that the SVP's condition has so changed that they are no longer meet the SVP criteria, or that they no longer pose a threat to the health and safety of others, the patient may petition the court for release from the state hospital. Finally, the state hospitals may recommend an SVP commitment for conditional release to a less restrictive environment if the community into the community through its conditional release program when we feel it's in the best interest of the patient and that we can impose conditions to adequately protect the community. So the committee proposed 3 questions to us. The first was to please provide an update on how the department is addressing the auditor's findings, including the timeline for the development of a written policy to ensure uniformity in the evaluation process. So we want to thank our auditors at the our colleagues at the California State Auditor for coming out and reviewing our program. We see it as an opportunity to improve and strengthen the sexual offender commitment program. We have taken the recommendations of the California State Auditor very seriously and have begun to work on addressing the deficiencies. We have developed a comprehensive plan to address the concerns raised in the audit finding, which includes issuing a written policy that provides a comprehensive list of the documents that shall be reviewed and included as part of the evaluations. We expect to release that written policy at the beginning of May. We're working to update the standardized assessment protocols. We have convened a team consisting of SVP evaluators and our DSH legal staff to update the SVP protocols, and we anticipate that that work will complete in September, and then we will move to implement the protocol through the regulatory process and expect to have those regulations in place by March of 2016. We're developing a checklist for reviewing the program and clinical requirements of an SVP evaluation, and we'll be including those as part of the standardized assessment protocol. We are also implementing an annual review of the SVP assessment protocol so we'll review it annually and make changes to this assessment protocol as necessary. And then finally, we're addressing training. The SVP evaluators are trained with a focus on the dynamic risk assessments, updates to the dynamic risk assessments as needed, legal and court testimony, and the Static 99 training. Second question, is there a quality control system in place to ensure that evaluators are properly trained and are considering all of the relevant factors in each case? We began implementing quality assurance measures back in October of 2014 and continue to improve and enhance our efforts. To date, we've established a quality assurance team that consists of 2 experienced SVP evaluators who have the responsibility to review evaluations, identify needs, and develop training to meet those needs. We've established a mentorship program. We pair newly hired evaluators with experienced evaluators or mentors for the first 4 months of case evaluations. We have also expanded that mentorship program to include current evaluators who were identified by the QA team as requiring additional training. We're developing a formal supervisory review process for the evaluation to ensure consistency and completeness. We're also compiling monthly statistics on each evaluator, which is provided to the quality assurance team. The QA team will then analyze that data. They identify the evaluators who are falling outside the group norm, and then we're reviewing their evaluations to provide specific feedback and/or training as necessary. Our DSH legal team has also enhanced its review of the SVP evaluations and are identifying issues and referring to the QA team as well so that they can address them and provide training. And the third question was, it appears from the data provided by DSH that the number of evaluations each year can vary significantly. How do you determine the budget for this workload each year, and is it adjusted based on the previous year's actual number of evaluations? So there's a number of factors over time that have impacted workload and budget for this program over the years. Historically, case load adjustments have been done based on several workload factors, including the number of initial and update evaluations that the team will need to do, the number of recommitment evaluations of the current SVP patients, court testimony, the evaluator travel to conduct evaluations and appear in court, and training. Since the inception of the program, the department contracted out for SVP evaluators and court testimony services, and budget adjustments were based on the projection of workload factors and the value of approved rates paid out to the contractors. The biannual SVP caseload estimate reflected the budget specific to the external contracts, and in earlier years of the program, we could see significant fluctuations in the workload. Additionally, in 2008, the unions challenged the department's use of contractors for the SVP evaluations, and SPB issued an administrative ruling that the department was not in compliance with the government code 19130-3B. Thus, the department moved to hiring civil servants and created a new civil service classification of the SVP evaluator. So that also adjusted and changed the flow of workload through our department. In more recent years, there have been several changes in law that have increased or decreased the workload of our SVP program. The increases really were tied to Jessica's Law and SB 1128, which reduced the number of sexually violent criminal offenses that one must have committed in order to be considered an SVP. And they also expanded the type of sex crimes that were considered sexually violent criminal offenses eligible for an SVP commitment. And then decrease in workload we saw as a result of AB 190, the realignment. So as a result of that, we did see the number of evaluations drop in the subsequent years. And in 2012 and 2013, we proposed a reduction in the SVP budget of about $2 million to adjust for that workload reduction. And actually, at the time, we requested that that money be transferred to the mentally disordered offender program. And we proposed that we would actually use the evaluators for the SVP evaluators and MDO evaluators. We would cross-train them and use them to do both programs. That way we could kind of balance out the workload between those two programs. So I'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you very much. Was that recommendation accepted?
Yes.
So you are using them on two
Yes.
programs? Okay, good.
Thank you.
LAO, do you have comments? DOF? Okay, are there any questions from members of the subcommittee?
I had one. When you go through the process, looking ahead for the next 2 or 3 years, is this like, at this point in time, you have these contractors and regular staff, okay? You have that mix of some contractors and regular staffs. So are you going to see a downturn in the annual number of evaluations that you do as you clear out the backlog, or is it just going to be at a certain level? So you said something about the fluctuation. Can you explain that maybe a little more so I understand that? I'm looking to see if if you're going to have ongoing kind of levels of workload, it might be better and more cost effective, because we're the budget committee, to maybe look at having regular staff do the work, and then when they have fluctuations, have contractors do that. So I want to know what your approach is going to be over the next few years.
Sure. Let me, first of all, let me clarify how we use the state staff versus the contracted staff currently.
Yeah, right.
So currently we do, our SVP evaluations are primarily conducted by civil service employees.
Right.
So we did convert our contract dollars, and so the initial evaluations and the recommitment and annual evaluations are done by civil service staff. Primarily, the contracted staff are used when we need, so when we do the initial evaluation, we have to do 2 evaluations, and if the 2 evaluators have a difference of opinion, we then send it out to the contract staff. We use 2 additional contract staff to
kind of
perform
like
additional review.
Conflicts.
Right, so for the difference of
Professional
opinions, right.
How
Then
often does that occur?
correct.
How
And
often
then,
does that happen?
oh, I don't know that number off the top of my head. We can, yeah,
Yeah,
don't
okay.
have that figure with me. So additionally, we do occasionally get rushes that come in from CDCR, and if we don't have civil service staff available that they're currently all assigned out to other workload, and we get a rush that we need to evaluate someone quickly, then we may also use the contracted staff to help perform those evaluations. But the majority of the evaluations now are performed by the contract staff. With respect to the backlog, we are working to try to reduce that backlog within the next 5 months. You know, evaluations, they're very time consuming. They take quite a bit of time. It takes, I believe, approximately about 40 hours to complete evaluations. So they're not something that get done quickly, but we are identifying resources that can help and assist to reduce that backlog as quickly as possible. The resources that we are going to be using, we will make sure that they are fully trained. We'll put them through a kind of a retraining to make sure that they're fully up to speed, and then they will help us work out that backlog.
Are you, you said you did 3,000 in 2013 and 2,000 in 2014 valuations, right? Is that correct?
I will have to look at the numbers,
I thought
apologize.
it was more like 1,600.
Well, I'm just asking. Read this report here.
Okay, so in 2013-14, we conducted 2,030 pre-commitment evaluations
Right.
and 406 recommitment evaluations.
Okay, so it's a little more than that.
Yeah.
So you're seeing the decline as the backlog gets cleared out, right? You said it's going to take about another 5 months to clear out the backlog. Then when you get to a point where you're pretty stable in terms of the pattern of workload, are you planning to have, what kind of level of staffing are you going to have at that point?
So we would continue with the existing level of staffing, and we have 31 evaluators. That the annual ongoing workload is tied to the number of referrals from CDCR, as well as the population within our hospitals. So it's dependent upon the number of referrals from CDCR, and then the existing commitments will receive their annual evaluations or their 2-year recommitment evaluations.
But it's between 2,000 and 3,000 a year, right?
Correct.
So you can kind of judge how much staff you're going to have
Right.
in that range at least.
Right.
Now-
And the numbers have been fairly, they do fluctuate a little bit, but they have been fairly consistent the last couple of
Okay,
years.
so what I'm looking for is some kind of, the backlog's kind of like a one-time kind of thing, and then you get rid of that, you have the contracts, and then after that, you get more stable, you kind of have your stability factor, and then we can kind of like anticipate kind of a certain level of staffing to handle a certain range of valuations on an annual basis, correct?
Correct.
Am I kind of like looking at, am I wrong somehow? Okay, so we should base the budget on, our like a plan that we have here on that kind of assumption, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so one last question, Madam Chair. When you say that you have to have a conflict evaluation, why do you have to do that? I mean, is there any reason you have to do that? Is there a legal reason? Can you explain that, please?
Right, yes, the statute does require that if we have 2 evaluations done, and if they do not agree, if we get one positive or one negative, it does require us to have, to hire to perform 2 additional evaluations.
Is there any reason you have to hire an outside person if somebody has a professional license that works for the state? And can 2 different people do the evaluation from a legal standpoint? Or why do you have to hire somebody that's not a state employee to do the evaluation versus having just 2 different people in the office do it? I mean, they're professional license, right? I mean, is there a reason?
Well, we have been using them
Does it
as,
require that in the statute?
Yes, it says
Okay, it's in the law?
Independent.
It has to have, what does it say, independent, or does it say, I'm just asking because I don't know. I mean, I kind of I understand this kind of concept, but I want to know why the outside people have to come in and do these evaluations. Is there some kind of reason why we have to have that in the statute, or why does that statute exist? Is it for a purpose? Or is it kind of for a purpose, or does somebody just put that in there?
so
I don't understand why.
the law does state that it should be a non-state evaluator.
Is there a reason? I like to, you know what I'm saying? I mean,
The
so,
law
I mean,
doesn't
you know.
always have to give reasons.
But I make the law. I mean, we're the people that do the laws, so I kind of want to know, okay, there must, you know, here's a law and there must be a reason. You know, we have laws that say, you can't drive your horse and buggy on a road, but, you know, there's no horse and buggy on the road, so why do we have that law? So I'm asking the same question here. Is there a particular reason why that has to exist that way? For,
Yeah, we don't,
yeah, what's the reason? I don't know.
I don't know that offhand, so I'd have to look into that,
Okay,
why it
can
was
we,
initiated.
I kind of wonder about that.
Yeah.
I sort of like, you know, why do we need to hire outside people to do these kinds of, you know, if there two people have the license, you know, they have to observe their professional ethics and, you know, that kind of thing. You know,
Okay, good
so,
question.
okay, that's the only question I had. I
Okay,
just
thank
wanted,
you. Thank you, Senator Bell. There are any other questions? Is there any public comment on this? Seeing and hearing none, this is an oversight item, so no action is necessary. I want to thank you for coming and
Thank you.
for setting out on the road to making the corrections noted in the audit. Thanks very much. I'm going to go back now to two issues that are proposed for vote only. The governor's budget requests 6 positions for the Santa Fe Springs Community Reentry Program for women beginning this year. It's no additional funding, it's just an assignment of positions. Okay, it's been moved. Please call the roll.
Madam Chair,
Aye.
Senator Anderson, Senator Bell.
Aye.
So that passes, and then we have some technical adjustments from CDCR to permanently realign resources in a number of programs and divisions. Net zero budget change and technical. Been moved. Please read the roll.
Madam Chair,
Aye.
Senator Anderson, Senator Bell.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That passes as well. So we will move to our items for discussion and action. We're going to be dealing now with, again, the Department of State Hospitals and the response to the Special Master's report of last year on the Coleman v. Brown lawsuit.